Rain hit the roof of the command van like static. Inside, voices overlapped, tight with frustration. The breach team was stalled. Cameras showed nothing. Comms were cutting in and out. No one knew where the hostage was. Maya Torres stood by the equipment rack, ignored. Her badge read, Canine Support. No one asked her opinion. She studied the layout again, saw what they missed. A storage corridor, unlisted, narrow, but clear. She clipped Rook's harness, opened the door, and stepped into the dark. 9 minutes later, she brought the hostage out herself. No one said a word. They just moved aside. Maya Torres stood near the edge of the tactical van as dusk settled over the warehouse district. The last of the sunlight flared against the upper windows of the abandoned building that now served as both a training ground and a live hostage rescue site. Floodlights cast harsh pools of white across the cracked concrete and rusted siding. The air smelled of diesel, oil, and cooling metal. Maya's boots were planted, her posture steady, her eyes sharp. She wore a plain tactical vest marked K9 Unit Support, with no insignia of rank. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her gloves hung clipped at her hip. At her side, Rook sat waiting. The sable German shepherd was alert and calm, his dark eyes sweeping the perimeter in sync with hers. His harness was scuffed but well-maintained, ready for whatever the night required. The leash clip at Maya's belt remained unfastened, dangling unused despite the tension building around them. Closer to the warehouse, the SWAT team gathered in tight groups, voices low and clipped. Samuel Reyes, the team leader, stood at the center of the cluster. He was built for command, or at least for its appearance. His gear polished, his patches crisp, and his voice pitched to carry just far enough. Operators checked weapons, adjusted helmets, and tapped gloved fingers against holstered sidearms. The scene felt rehearsed, as if every gesture had been done before 100 times. Maya watched without shifting, her hand brushing Rook's neck briefly. He stayed still beneath her touch, his muscles coiled like a spring that only she could release. "Handler stays out here," Reyes called without looking her way. His tone was casual, almost friendly in its dismissal. Another operator chuckled and added, "Keep the leash ready, just in case we need morale support." A ripple of polite laughter passed through the group. Not cruel, but confident that the joke was safe to make. No one expected Maya to respond, and she didn't. She kept her gaze on the warehouse door, the one they all seemed to think was the only point of entry that mattered. Inside the van, the monitor flickered with the feed from their helmet cams. Maya stepped closer, checking the resolution, noting the slight lag in the side corridor camera. She knew these systems as well as she knew her own gear. She also knew when something did not align. She reached for the rolled blueprint she had brought, the one she had studied after hours in her small apartment. When she unrolled it against the side of the van and traced a gloved finger along the building's edge, she paused at a line that the shared schematic had overlooked. A narrow service corridor, unlit and easy to miss, ran along the building's east wall. It ended near what the map marked as a blind storage room. Maya's brow furrowed. She hesitated for just a moment, then stepped forward, blueprint in hand. "Reyes," she said, voice low but firm. He glanced over, distracted. "There's a side corridor here. It's not on your team overlay. It might give you another approach." She held the blueprint where he could see. He barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "We're good." "Torres," he replied. "Stay in your lane. Let us do the breach." Another operator, younger, smirked. "Let the dog handler handle the leash," he muttered, not quite under his breath. Maya exhaled slowly through her nose, folding the blueprint and tucking it under her arm. Rook shifted his weight, picking up on her tension, but made no sound. The team stacked near the main door, running last checks and calling out readiness. The warehouse loomed over them, dark windows reflecting the floodlights back in distorted glare. The team moved forward on command, boots silent on the cracked pavement. Maya stood where they left her, hand resting on Rook's head for a single heartbeat before dropping to her side. The leash clip at her belt swung gently as the breeze caught it. It felt heavier tonight, not in weight, but in meaning. She watched the monitor as the team entered the building. The feed jumped once, the image blurring at the edge of that corridor she had tried to point out. Maya blinked and leaned closer, but the moment passed. The signal stabilized. The team disappeared deeper into the structure, voices fading to coded radio calls. The night closed around her, thick with expectation, but none of it directed at her. Rook stayed at her heel, eyes on the shadows beyond the perimeter lights. The dog was trained to wait, just as she was. Maya felt the familiar pressure of being outside the door, both literally and within the unspoken rules of the team. She had seen this before, in other places, under other names. She knew what it was to stand ready and be unseen. Her fingers curled briefly around the edge of the blueprint, creased now from where she had gripped it too tightly. She loosened her hold, let it rest against her thigh, and breathed in the scent of oil and dust and anticipation. The van's radio crackled, filling the silence with static and clipped updates. Reyes's voice came through, all confidence and control. Maya listened, ears tuned to the spaces between words, to what was not being said. She kept her eyes on the monitor, on the building, on the path she had traced alone in her apartment with a pencil and a transparent overlay. The leash clip at her side gleamed under the floodlight, untouched, ready, ignored. As the team moved deeper, the warehouse swallowed them, their shapes blending into the dark. Maya and Rook remained at the edge of the scene, a part of it, and apart from it all at once. The warehouse seemed to breathe, the metal siding creaking softly in the cooling air. The moment stretched, the night settling heavier with each passing second. Maya shifted her weight, steady and silent, waiting not for permission but for necessity to call her forward. The apartment smelled faintly of tea and dog fur, a scent that had settled into the fabric of the place like a memory. Maya Torres moved through the space with quiet efficiency, her feet bare against the old wood floor, her breath steady and even. Outside, the city murmured through the double-paned windows, a distant rhythm of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional hum of traffic lights changing cycle. Inside, everything was still. Warm lamplight cast long shadows across the walls, touching the corners of a worn rug, a folded blanket on the chair, and the low shelf that held her daily life in small, precise arrangements. A mug sat near the edge of the counter, steam curling up into the quiet. The kettle had long since finished its song. Maya poured the water with care, watching the color bloom in the cup, deepening to amber. She did not rush. There were no notifications, no news feeds glowing from nearby screens. Her phone lay untouched, screen dark, tucked near the sink. The outside world would wait. Rook lay near the front door, his body stretched long on the floor, his head resting on his front paws. One ear turned slightly at the sound of her movement, but he did not lift it. His breathing was slow, even, always alert, but never restless. Maya watched him for a moment in awe, then set her mug down and walked to the corner table near the window. The old blueprint tube leaned against the wall beside it, its label worn and faded. She pulled it upright and opened it carefully, sliding out the rolled paper and the thin sheet of transparent film she had added weeks ago. She cleared the table, smoothing the blueprint with the palm of her hand. The familiar grid lines stretched out beneath her fingers, marked with operator routes, entry points, fallback paths. She layered the transparency on top, aligning it with quiet exactness. Her pencil moved across the surface without hesitation, a single, sharp line. The service corridor she had seen yesterday, now traced again, clean and deliberate. It bypassed the main entry routes. No one else had noticed. No one had wanted to. She paused with the pencil in her hand, eyes resting on the marked line. Her expression remained neutral, her breathing unchanged. A memory flickered, not summoned, just allowed. A different place, a different heat, a deployment year no one talked about anymore. She had been younger, still military, still wearing full gear. Her partner at the time, a black and tan named Ghost. The order had come through clearly. No entry. Secondary team en route. Hold perimeter. But the screaming had been real. Not a simulation. Not audio fed through a command channel. Children in a stone building. Windows blackened by smoke. Civilians pinned by falling timber. Maya had moved without asking. Ghost had broken the doorframe with his shoulder. The two of them pulled 6 people from the back stairwell before support even arrived. The reprimand came 2 days later. Disregard for protocol. Tactical insubordination. She had accepted it without argument, because she had not disobeyed to make a point. She had acted because it was right. The reassignment came weeks later. She packed quietly, transferred to stateside support, and never asked for explanation. Her file was marked as field restricted. Her name faded from the active mission rosters. Now, years later, she trained in silence. She marked what others ignored. She prepared without being told. She folded the transparency carefully, aligning the edges with the edge of the blueprint, and returned both to the tube. Her hands moved with calm precision. Nothing rushed. Nothing loud. She placed the tube upright beside the door again, then knelt beside Rook, who lifted his head the moment she came close. "Up," she said softly. The dog stood immediately, his frame lean and strong. His eyes never left hers. "Check." Rook turned in a tight arc, nose sweeping along the floor, then looked back. Back! He reversed, step by step, until he stood against the wall, waiting for the next signal. "Hold." He froze, head up, tail still. Not a muscle moved. She walked across the room, circled the couch, and gestured once more. Rook cleared the armrest with a single motion, landed lightly, and turned without a sound. The drills were familiar, but she never treated them as routine. Every cue mattered. Every response confirmed the bond they had shaped through repetition and trust. Maya gave one final command, and Rook padded to his mat near the door and settled again, watching her with steady eyes. She reached down and scratched the fur behind his left ear. "Good," she whispered. He blinked slowly, content. She stood again and returned to the kitchen, lifted her mug, and took a sip. The tea had cooled slightly, but the flavor held steady. She leaned against the counter, her eyes drifting across the room. There were no medals on the walls, no framed certificates or polished commendations. Only one photo sat on the shelf, tucked behind the training manuals. It showed a younger version of herself, face streaked with dust, kneeling beside an older K9, both of them facing the camera but not smiling. The desert behind them stretched in low ridge lines. Her partner had long since passed. The photo remained. Beside it, the manuals bore creased spines and handwritten tabs. Rappelling techniques, urban clearance formations, canine sensory thresholds under stress. She had read every page, then read them again. The knowledge was not for display. It was for readiness. The apartment remained quiet. Outside, a gust of wind rattled a branch across the window pane. Rook lifted his head once more, then let it rest again. Maya finished her tea, rinsed the mug, and dried it with a folded towel. The night had deepened, the city noise growing thinner as it moved past midnight. She checked the front door lock, then dimmed the lights, leaving only the glow of the small lamp on the table. The blueprint tube cast a shadow across the floor as she passed. She paused by the shelf, glanced once more at the photo, then turned away. Nothing in the room announced her past. Nothing declared what she knew, but everything in the space. The folded harnesses, the silent training, the traced corridor held the shape of preparation. She moved through it all without hesitation, her footsteps steady and soundless. There would be no award for this night, no witness to the precision she practiced. But the work was done. The knowledge was real, and she would be ready. The conference room smelled like cheap coffee and industrial carpet, the kind of scent that clung to uniforms and lived in fluorescent lighting. Maya Torres stepped in quietly, her boots soundless on the tile. The tactical team had already taken the seats closest to the center table, spreading out across mismatched office chairs pulled from different parts of the building. Cords tangled under the desk, monitors blinked with paused footage, and several tablets lay face down next to half-drained water bottles. She stood near the back wall, behind a structural column that hadn't been painted in years. No one turned to acknowledge her. Rook sat beside her, alert and still, his ears slightly tilted forward, watching the group as if they were a herd of animals he had been trained to interpret, but not approach. Reyes leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice already filling the room with controlled authority. He gestured toward the screen behind him, where the warehouse schematic glowed under the feed overlay. His tone was calm, firm, the voice of a man presenting failure as necessity. It was a false trip. We followed protocol. No entry after breach trigger. We extracted without exposure. Clean abort. Heads nodded. The operators flanking him murmured agreement. One tapped the rim of a styrofoam cup and added, "Sensors were off by maybe 1 meter. No way to predict that crosswire." His voice sounded tired but confident, like someone who knew the language of justification. Maya kept her hands clasped in front of her, fingers resting lightly on the blueprint tube tucked against her hip. She watched the replay screen cycle again, showing the interior movement from each body cam. There it was the moment they passed the unmarked corridor, the one she'd tried to raise during staging. Her eyes narrowed, but her expression did not change. Her fingers shifted slightly on the tube. She did not speak yet. Reyes turned toward the commander seated at the head of the table. "We'll need clearer schematic access before the next entry attempt. Until then, it's too unstable." Maya stepped forward. Only slightly. Enough to let her voice carry. "There is an alternate approach. I traced it from the original blueprints. The corridor on the east." She didn't finish. The commander raised one hand without looking at her. "This is a tactical after-action review," he said. "Let's stay in our roles, please." The room didn't go silent. It didn't need to. The dismissal was so clean, so practiced, that the conversation simply flowed on around her, leaving her words to evaporate in place. Reyes didn't glance her way. Another operator shifted in his seat and cleared his throat, as if embarrassed for her. Near the edge of the table, a young tech leaned sideways and whispered, just loud enough, canine unit still lingering. A chuckle came from his neighbor, a handler Maya had seen before but never spoken with. "You'd think she was applying for entry team," he replied, his voice casual and amused. Maya's posture remained level. She didn't look at them. Rook didn't move, though his eyes had followed the speaker with precise awareness. One of the officers made a mock offer gesture with his hand, as if holding out a treat to the dog. Rook did not respond. Maya didn't flinch. She turned her attention back to the mission feed. The footage now showed the retreat. Boot steps through debris, calls for fallback, Reyes leading the withdrawal. She watched the exact moment the team passed the corridor, the camera angle catching it in partial shadow. Her own pencil mark had followed that same wall on the transparency she had laid across the blueprint. The angle was right. The missed opportunity was there, clear as day. Her hand tightened briefly around the blueprint tube. The material creaked softly under her grip. She exhaled through her nose and relaxed it again. Behind her, the door opened. A man stepped into the room, awkward in posture, still wearing a visitor badge on a lanyard. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his face pale with the kind of fear that had not yet burned off into exhaustion. The room quieted just a little as he spoke. "My daughter," he said. "She's still in there, I was told someone said you had a team going back in today. Reyes turned toward him. His voice softened. Not by much. We're evaluating options. Visibility's low. Trip hazards are unpredictable. It's high risk. The man looked around the room, eyes desperate. She's 15. She's got asthma. You said this was a full response operation. Isn't anyone? We understand, the commander interrupted, but entry is suspended until recon is complete. Safety protocols are in place for a reason. Maya felt the air thin in the room, not literally, but in tone, in presence. No one stood up. No one offered timeline, plan, or reassurance. The man's shoulders sagged as he turned slightly toward the door again. We're doing everything we can, Reyes added. The words sounded practiced, the kind of phrase built to end a conversation rather than start one. Maya stepped forward again, just enough for her boots to shift on the tile. The commander turned to her, not unkind but flat. Stay ready from the van, he said. That's all we're asking. She nodded once. She did not argue. She did not ask for clarification. Rook rose silently beside her, already anticipating movement. Maya turned and walked back toward the door. As she reached for the handle, her fingers brushed once more against the blueprint tube at her side. The plastic was warmer now from her grip, more creased than it had been before. It had held the answer once. It still did. But no one had asked to see it. Behind her, the team resumed discussion. Voices overlapped. Screens updated. And the room moved forward without her. The fog moved like smoke over the warehouse perimeter, thick enough to soften the floodlights into pale halos against the steel siding. The air was cold and damp, saturated with the scent of oil and wet concrete. It was 2:14 in the morning. Maya Torres stood beside the rear of the SWAT van, her gloved hand resting lightly on Rook's shoulder. The German shepherd stood alert, weight balanced, eyes scanning the dark. The other officers were inside the van, heads bent over radios and monitors, voices tight and clipped. The negotiator's line cracked once, then went silent. A moment later, a scream sliced through the air. It wasn't from the radio. It was live. A human voice, sharp and sudden, from deep inside the warehouse. One scream, then nothing. Static filled the van. Someone swore. Another asked for confirmation. The response came back garbled, the signal breaking into fragments. Reyes stepped to the edge of the van doorway, one hand still pressing his earpiece. His face was pale under the glow of the floodlight. Not afraid, but uncertain. Maya could see it in the tension of his jaw, in the way his other hand hovered near his vest, but did not move to draw anything. Command said to hold position, wait for recon, no blind entry. Another operator muttered behind him, "We don't have eyes. No one's cleared for breach." Maya watched the monitors. They showed nothing useful, just shifting shadows and broken heat signatures. She heard the quiet hiss of breathing through one of the headsets, but no direction followed. She stepped forward. "I can go," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air anyway. "I have the corridor. He's in the blind zone. I can reach him." Heads turned, not all at once, but gradually, as if no one was sure they had heard her correctly. Reyes shook his head, dismissive. "You're canine support. Torres, you're not breach team." Another voice came from the van, lower and rough with tension. "You go in there. You're alone. There's no cover." Maya didn't answer. She crouched beside Rook and adjusted his harness, switching the side tab to silent mode. The clip clicked once, low and precise. Rook remained motionless, only his breathing audible between the static bursts on the radio. She opened her blueprint tube, unrolled the transparency she had marked days ago, and laid it across the nearest flat surface. Her gloved finger traced the line, the unmarked corridor, the one they ignored. She stood and met Reyes's eyes. "I know where I'm going." He stepped toward her, hand lifted in warning. "You're not cleared. You do this. You're off record." Another officer added, "It's too late anyway." Maya turned away and walked. No one followed. She crossed the loading bay perimeter without a word, her boots silent on the wet ground. The backside of the warehouse rose in front of her like a wall of shadow. Her breath came steady. The fog swallowed her after 20 steps. The side corridor entrance was half hidden behind a collapsed scaffold and a rusted water drum. She reached it in seconds. Her hand found the latch by memory. It opened without sound. Rook moved ahead, his body low, tail still. No command was spoken. He knew. Inside, the hallway was darker than she expected. The only light came from the emergency strip running along the base of one wall, broken in places, flickering in others. She moved forward, shoulders brushing paint-chipped drywall, eyes on the curve ahead. Rook stopped suddenly, his posture shifting. She stilled. He looked back at her and then forward again. One small signal. Movement ahead. She dropped to one knee, pulled a flashball from her side pouch, and primed it without activating, just in case. They moved again. 10 steps. Then 15. At the end of the hall, a door hung open at an angle, its hinges half bent. She could see the outline of a figure on the floor, small, curled, a chair nearby, tipped over, zip ties glinting faintly under the edge light. Maya approached slowly, checking the corners with each step. No sound but breathing. One voice, soft and shallow. The hostage was unconscious. A girl, maybe 15, arms bound, clothes torn but intact. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, mouth half open. Maya pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck. Pulse was fast, but steady. She moved quickly, cutting the ties with her pocket blade. Rook stood by the door, watching the hallway behind them. She reached for her radio, keyed the mic, and whispered, "One victim, conscious, preparing to exfil." The response didn't come, only more static. She turned toward the hallway. Rook's ears shot forward, his head turned. He took 1 step back. A signal. Someone was coming. Maya gave the girl a soft touch on the arm, then pointed to the corner. "Stay down," she whispered. Rook looked up at her. She raised her hand and formed the signal. 1 finger down. "Go low." Rook moved. The captor came in fast, expecting silence, maybe chaos. What he met instead was a blur of black and sable. The dog struck clean, his teeth never breaking skin, his body weight driving the man backward into the wall. Maya was there before the man could shout. Her knee pinned his shoulder, her arms locked around his wrists. She dropped him to the ground and flipped him over, zip-tying his hands behind his back in 3 seconds. No shouting, no wasted motion, no violence beyond control. When she stood, Rook returned to her side and sat. The girl stared up from the floor, wide-eyed, stunned, but unhurt. Maya offered a hand. "Let's go," she said, just loud enough. They stepped into the hallway together. The fog waited on the other side. The floodlights cut harsh angles across the warehouse yard, their beams catching on metal sheeting, wet concrete, and the worn edges of the perimeter tape. The fog had thinned but not lifted, curling low against the ground. Radios crackled. Sirens rose in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Voices layered over one another, commands, questions, clipped updates, all stacking into noise. Then something changed. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the building's east wall. 1 silhouette. Then 2. A third moved behind them, lower to the ground, fluid in motion. The light caught her first Maya Torres. Her vest streaked with dust, her shoulders squared. Her face was calm, unreadable. At her side, the hostage leaned on her arm, limping but upright, a pale girl with blood on one sleeve and tears drying along her jaw. Behind them, Rook padded forward with ears up and steps quiet, watching the movement ahead. The yard froze. One operator standing near the van took a half step forward. Another lowered his radio mid-transmission. The tactical team, clustered in uncertain clusters around the main bay, turned toward the source of movement with expressions that flickered between confusion and disbelief. "She went in," someone whispered. It wasn't a question. Reyes stood near the edge of the command line, his stance rigid. His face registered the truth in pieces the girl's condition. The fact that Maya had her. The fact that no one else had entered. He said nothing. The cordon near the medic tent broke as a man pushed through, breath shallow, face tight with grief that had not yet caught up to reality. He stopped cold at the sight of his daughter. She saw him, staggered toward him, and fell into his arms. The embrace was clumsy and desperate. The girl sobbed into his shoulder, shaking. He asked no questions, only held her. Then, still clinging to him, she turned her head and pointed. "It was her," she said, her voice hoarse, "the woman with the dog. She saved me." Maya did not move. A beat passed. Then everything rushed forward at once. Medics moved in first, reaching for the girl, checking her vitals, murmuring rapid instructions. Someone shouted for a gurney. Another called out coordinates. A tech with a tablet ran toward the rear van, unlocking the live feed logs. Cameras tilted. People followed. Reyes stepped back, his face shifting but not speaking. He opened his mouth once and closed it again. A junior tech replayed the last few minutes of security footage. The screen lit with a side-angle view of the service corridor. The figure of Maya passed through it, Rook close behind, silent, measured, clear. "She saw it," the tech said quietly. Another operator leaned over his shoulder, "and she used it clean." No one laughed. No one spoke louder than a murmur. Maya lowered herself to one knee beside Rook. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately. She unclipped the harness, coiling the leash without tension. Her fingers found the familiar spot behind his left ear and scratched gently. Rook closed his eyes, just for a moment. She whispered something no one could hear. Cameras flashed now. Not many. Just a few lenses raised by people who didn't yet know whether this moment would be buried or documented. Maya didn't look at them. Her eyes scanned the perimeter, the lights. The equipment sprawled in rushed half-use. Then she stood. The crowd parted without instruction. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a quiet shift of weight, a repositioning of bodies that created a path without words. As she walked, they moved. Some lowered their gaze. Some held it too long. Others turned away, unsure of what to do now that the line had changed. The leash hung loose in Maya's hand, not dragging, not tight just there, coiled with purpose. She did not look behind her. Rook followed at her heel. Someone near the van started to speak. Who cleared her? But the question faded before it finished. It did not matter anymore. The answer was already visible in every movement that had followed. Maya passed Reyes without acknowledgement. He shifted slightly in her direction, but his words failed to leave his mouth. He simply watched her walk. She moved through the floodlit yard as if it were any other job site, her stride even, her breathing quiet. The noise faded behind her. The voices thinned. What remained was a strange stillness that followed her like a wake, the air realigning in her absence. The girl would live. The corridor had worked. The system had failed to see it. Maya had gone anyway. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask for thanks. She had already done the thing no one else would, or could, or dared to imagine. The truth had arrived not in words, but in outcome. And that was enough. The office was still. No radios buzzed here, no barked commands or screen glare, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady breath of climate control cycling through the vents. A thick folder rested between two coffee rings on the desk. The seal on the front flap had been broken already. Inside, printed on a clean sheet of government stock paper, was a single line updated in bold. Special Tactics K9, Field Operator. The senior official across from her said nothing as he pushed the folder forward. His uniform was crisp. His expression unreadable. Not unfriendly. Just official. The formality of the gesture said enough. The decision had already been made. Maya didn't reach for the folder right away. She read the words once, then closed the flap and picked it up by the spine. "Thank you," she said, quiet and even. He gave a nod. She stood, folder in hand, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the hallway stretched long and empty, lit by early morning spill through frosted windows. The folder tucked easily into the side pocket of her vest. She didn't open it again. The training field still held the cold from the night before. Dew clung to the edge of the mats. Cones were set along the obstacle course, and the worn tire stack had been shifted slightly from where they'd left it last. Rook moved ahead of her, trotting to the start line and waiting without being called. She joined him there, hands resting on her hips for a moment. The city behind them had not fully woken yet. Traffic murmured far off, and the nearest construction site hadn't started their day. She raised one hand and gave a small, practiced signal. Rook dropped low. Another signal. He moved forward, weaving between the cones with effortless precision. His paws made no sound on the turf. The field remained theirs for the next hour. Maya gave no verbal commands, only motion, gesture, presence. The rhythm between them was tuned, familiar, sharpened through years of repetition. Over and over. He cleared each obstacle. Over and over. She adjusted his angles, his timing, his tracking, not to show off, just to stay ready. Later, as they walked back toward the gate, a young handler from the last rotation stood near the chain-link fence. He was dressed for drills, but his vest sat loose on one shoulder. His hands were stuffed into his pockets. When he saw Maya, he stepped forward. "I saw the footage," he said, voice not quite steady, from the corridor. She didn't stop walking, but her pace slowed just enough to invite conversation. He walked beside her, just off her left side. Rook glanced back but kept walking. The handler scratched his jaw, then tried again. "If you ever have room, if you're training, would you mind if I observed?" She looked at him, not sharply, just long enough for him to quiet. Then she nodded once. "Bring gloves," she said. He smiled, small and unsure, then peeled off toward the gear station. Maya and Rook kept going. Later that week, the call came in over the comm channel, just after sunrise. Different location, different team. The request was urgent, but not panicked. There was a briefing in 40 minutes. Maya was already moving. The new site was industrial. Not quite abandoned. Not quite stable. Operators gathered at the edge of a scaffold zone, checking gear, reviewing maps. The mood was focused, brisk, without the posturing she had grown used to. This time, no one stood in her way. No one pointed her toward the van. When the question came who's taking point, no one hesitated. A voice near the front answered first. "The woman with the dog?" No debate followed. Maya adjusted the straps on Rook's vest and gave a soft whistle. They moved together toward the breach line, calm, practiced. She did not feel the need to speak. Rook stayed at her side, head high, waiting. The light changed as they stepped beneath the steel framing. The shade cooled the air, but her breathing stayed even. The team behind her readied without commentary. Radios synced, weapons cleared. Maya's hand rested near Rook's shoulder. One signal, and he would go. No badge would make this moment easier. No title would guide her choices. She would rely on what she knew, what she had always known, her own judgment, her own training, the silent bond with the dog at her side. As the operation began, Maya led the way. She did not glance back. There were no speeches, no applause, no banners waiting. The air was thick with dust and purpose. Ahead of her stretched the unknown, and behind her came the sound of boots hitting ground in rhythm. The folder with her credentials remained zipped inside her pack. It would not make her better. It only gave her the room to keep going. The leash hung coiled on her belt, loose and ready, and Rook moved with her, as always, without needing to be told. Some heroes never ask to be seen. Maya Torres did not raise her voice, demand a title, or wait for permission. She prepared in silence, acted with precision, and proved that quiet strength can shift the weight of a moment. When the system looked past her, she stepped into the dark anyway, not for glory, but because someone needed help and she was ready. Her story reminds us that real worth is not always recognized at first. Sometimes, it lives in the overlooked spaces, steady and sure, waiting for the world to catch up. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the unseen strength in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories of quiet courage, where power speaks not through volume, but through action.